I think it's important to review some important components of the debate that we had here today. Little did I think that I'd be quoting former President Bill Clinton, but I think it's important. He once said that he wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. But unfortunately, in today's debate, the word rare has been dropped and only focused on safe and legal. Anytime that we debate an emotional issue such as this, I think it's also important to revisit the facts. Mr. Speaker, I understand that this is a deeply personal issue for each and every person here and every constituent that we represent. I could share my own story, and I'll be happy to do so privately. When my wife and I chose not to pursue the testing, because for us it did not make a difference. But when we later visited the doctor's office and we were told that we may have lost our first child, which thankfully we did not, it was definitely the emotional roller coaster that some have decided here. We thankfully had a series of tests that showed that my now 16-year-old daughter was okay and would ultimately be born healthy. Mr. Speaker, the facts of this debate, and I think that there are several that have been misinterpreted and misrepresented, and I think it's important to correct the record. The reference was made to North Dakota abortion clinics. For the information of the members, those services are in fact provided by the Red River Women's Care Center. Roe versus Wade, which was, I understand, the publicly recognized, legally binding opinion that is often recognized and referenced anytime that there's a discussion about abortion, simply selectively quoting from Roe versus Wade, specific to the second trimester abortion requirements, those were later overturned by Planned Parenthood v. Casey and the Carhart decisions by the United States Supreme Court. While that was the first case, that is not the final and binding authority when you review the rest of the constitutional case law. And to inaccurately misrepresent selective quotes from that, I think, is a fundamental disservice. There was also a reference regarding the criminality and the charges that were referenced. I will once again remind members that that specific provision has been previously upheld by that same Supreme Court. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to confuse the issues of confidentiality because I think it's important. Confidentiality is absolutely important between a patient and a doctor. However, our current Abortion Control Act, again, which has been constitutionally affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, already collects the information that the good gentleman was referencing. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, for those who received the email, as I did, regarding the LRB opinion, there are 2 points. One, I'd encourage you to read the top of the opinion, where they say that it is merely advisory, and quoting from the very top, does not issue binding legal opinions. Mr. Speaker, just as we can debate the meaning of different cases here today, what we cannot disagree with are the facts that have been outlined. And for those who are concerned that we haven't done enough because amendments were ruled out of order, Mr. Speaker, I would simply point to the other legislative accomplishments that we have undertaken. Specific to education funding, which was referenced, it's been increased. Special education funding, early intervention funding. In fact, Mr. Speaker, since 2010 and 11, these services, among many others, directed to this population have increased by $978 million. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Lehigh Valley area instituted a request for a maternal death study, which one of the prior speakers talked about. That study is currently being conducted. We've worked in a bipartisan way to pass bills that ultimately became law, that increased opportunities for those with disabilities, for employment and protections. We've supported changes to the foster care and the adoptive care areas. We passed a bill regarding perinatal care, and we've increased and strengthened the family nurse partnerships in our budget. that provide for maternal visits. Mr. Speaker, I think when you look at all of those bills that were appropriately enacted, appropriately voted, to try to hang your legislative hat on an amendment that was ruled out of order is simply not accurate. We've worked in a bipartisan way to have other successes. I'm confident that we will do so on other issues as well, even as we head into this budget cycle. But Mr. Speaker, for me and many of the constituents that I represent, this bill is about protecting those with Down syndrome. It's consistent with existing case law that already exists regarding sex selection. And Mr. Speaker, it's about protecting innocent life. I urge a yes vote.